Kurt Cobain, frontman, guitarist, and primary songwriter for the multi-platinum grunge band Nirvana, is credited with bringing punk rock into the mainstream during the 90s.
Kurt Cobain was the last true rock star. There haven't been any since.
But after disappearing for a week, Kurt is found dead from a gunshot blast. He is just 27.
The news of Cobain's death was heartbreaking to millions of his fans, but to his close friends and family, it was not a surprise.
He leaves behind a daughter and a legacy that would impact the world of music for a long time to come.
It's a big surprise that somebody with this much wealth wouldn't have even a simple will.
With no will, Kurt's estate is left to someone whose behavior is often questionable.
And they even demanded that she undergo a psychiatric evaluation.
His music is still living and breathing, and his legacy is still living on.
The fame, the fortune, the legacy of Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain is a creative genius and artist who starts the grunge rock band Nirvana in 1987 at the age of 20. In a matter of years, Kurt and Nirvana introduced their style of punk rock to a wide audience.
He had the raw talent, the ambition, and great songwriting skills to propel his band Nirvana to the top.
Kurt prefers to live a simple life and seems to struggle with his fame and raw emotions.
You like fatherhood?
Vodka? Yes, I love vodka.
Cobain was already taking a step back from his close relationships, increasing his drug use, and basically stepping out of life before his suicide.
Kurt dies alone and by his own hand. He could never have predicted where his music would end up and how many people would be profiting from his legacy.
Over 20 years later, Kurt Cobain's music that he wrote is now still part of popular culture, like the Muppets movie and Guitar Hero.
This is the story of all that he left behind. Kurt Donald Cobain is born on February 20th, 1967, in the West Coast logging town of Aberdeen, Washington. His father, Donald, is an auto mechanic, while his mother, Wendy, is a homemaker. But music runs through his bloodline. An uncle played in a band, and his Aunt Marie Earl played guitar and was rumored to have performed in bands around the country. One of his great uncles was an Irish tenor. Young Kurt is a born artist. He paints and draws his favorite cartoon and comic book characters, and his bedroom resembles an art studio. At 4, he begins singing and playing piano, and soon he's playing the drums. He listens to all kinds of music.
Some of the early songs Kurt Cobain liked to listen to were Hey Jude by the Beatles, Hey Hey We're the Monkees, their theme song. He loved Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, and even Terry Jack's Seasons in the Sun. He was a pop geek early on.
Kurt is a bright, bubbly, charismatic child, but his world darkens when he's only 8.
Kurt's parents' divorce likely started this depressive tendency that he had, this ruminating. It's part of what made him a great artist, but it's also what made his life so unbearable.
Kurt lives with his father, but feels displaced by his father's new wife and her 2 children. On weekends, he visits his mother and sister and is troubled by his mother's new husband.
After Cobain's parents divorced, he started to witness his mom suffer domestic abuse at the hands of boyfriends. These traumas, these emotional traumas, they influenced his lyrics in some of the songwriting to pro-feminist causes, and in fact, Nirvana later would support causes that promoted feminism and equality of the sexes.
But there's a bright spot during this difficult time. When Kurt is 14, his uncle Chuck gives him a used guitar and more Beatles albums.
Before Kurt wrote one of his early songs called About a Girl, he sat down and actually listened to Meet the Beatles 3 hours over and over and over, and then wrote the song. And if you listen to the chord changes, you can hear sort of some pop chords that would have fit in with the Beatles. Writing music was an outlet for Kurt to deal with a lot of the emotional trauma of his early childhood.
Increasingly alienated from his family, Kurt becomes withdrawn and defiant and develops a rebellious attitude he will later express in his music. It's more than his father can handle. Kurt spends the next few years shuttled between various family members and friends.
Kurt turned to Christianity in the mid-1980s when he started to live with his friend Jesse and his family. And these religious moments in his life, again, were another effort to try and help the emotional turmoil that he was going through in his young life. As he turned to Christianity, Jesse, his friend, even witnessed him one day say, "I've found God." And these same words would show up in the song Lithium, where he would sing, "I light candles in a daze, and I've found God."
In high school, Kurt follows his artistic desires.
As a freshman, he played sports because he knew his dad wanted him to play sports. But he quit sports, and by his sophomore year, he had then transferred to Aberdeen's high school, where he found himself to be an outsider. He didn't fit in with the jocks, he didn't fit in with the preppies. As a result, he was on edge, and he always felt on the outside looking in. He didn't quite fit in anywhere to the groups.
Kurt's best friend is gay, and Kurt is perceived as gay, but he's comfortable on the margins of society, which will later be reflected in his music. During Kurt's second year in high school, he lives with his mother in Aberdeen. That year, he records his first songs at his Aunt Marie's house. He spends the next few years seeing rock concerts in nearby Olympia, concentrating on art projects, experimenting with music, and immersing himself in Seattle's punk scene.
Kurt discovered punk music and the Melvins in the early 1980s, and as a result, he became a follower of the leader Buzz Osborne. And Buzz gave a lot of advice to Kurt about how to plan a set list, how to perform live, how to play your guitar, the importance of practicing. And Kurt followed these things because he had ambition to be like the Melvins. I think most importantly, the Melvins made Kurt Cobain realize, hey, if they can do it, so can I.
2 weeks before he's to graduate high school, Kurt drops out after realizing he doesn't have enough credits. His mother delivers an ultimatum: leave home or get a job. Eventually, Kurt moves to Olympia, where rents are cheaper.
Olympia is a very artsy town, and when Kurt moved there, he really thrived artistically. Although he didn't feel like he was as cool as the rest of the artsy crowd, he still focused on his art. He did photo collages, he wrote in his journals, and his journals were the origin of many of his lyrics. And most importantly, he played guitar as much as he possibly could. He kept practicing.
In 1985, Kurt forms his first band, Fecal Matter. They make a demo tape.
The songs were about alienation and struggle against classism in society and rebellion. Those were the main themes of his early songs.
Soon, Kurt is eager to form a new band. He approaches musician Krist Novoselic, who is also a fan of the Melvins. A few months later, Novoselic listens to the Fecal Matter demo tape and accepts. They find a drummer, and the first incarnation of Nirvana is formed.
Kurt said that Nirvana meant the attainment of perfection. He had listened to late-night shows on Buddhism and become affected by the idea of cycles of rebirth and cycles of human suffering that come from the proponents of Buddhism. So he felt that was the perfect name, not only for his band, but for him to exorcise those demons that he carried with him from an early age.
In January 1988, Nirvana records a 10-song demo with legendary Seattle producer Jack Endino of the record label Sub Pop. Sub Pop co-founder Jonathan Pohlman hears the tape and suggests putting out a Nirvana single.
Love Buzz was the first single that Nirvana released. They ran a limited edition of 1,000 copies. It sold out right away. It was a big turning point for the band as they started to reach a bigger audience.
Nirvana's popularity on the Seattle music scene grows. In 1989, they released their debut album, Bleach, which they record for $606.17. It's a critical hit in the underground rock community and sells an initial 35,000 copies, significant for an indie label release, but it fails to chart.
Bleach was about dualism. Kurt's lyrics oftentimes would go from sincerity to sarcasm, humor to rage, and it was almost a minestrone of different types of vibes all put together in one album.
Sub Pop gives Nirvana a $600 advance against royalties for their first year. It's not enough to live on, but Kurt isn't interested in getting a job. Kurt has had chronic stomach pain since childhood, and he starts self-medicating with a variety of drugs. He claims that doing heroin for 3 days gives him relief.
Heroin will relieve all pain. That's why it's so addictive. Most addicts start using because they have a real physical or emotional pain that they're trying to medicate, but drugs are so powerful that it ends up becoming this downward spiral that they're powerless to control.
But still, the songs keep coming, and Kurt and Novoselic are keen to make another album, but they still haven't found the right drummer. They audition again and find the perfect fit with multi-instrumentalist Dave Grohl.
Kurt started to grow very frustrated with Sub Pop. They didn't have the financial resources to take the band to the next level. The band was stuck in vans, touring the country. They weren't making money. Kurt was ambitious, and he wanted to get on a major label. So when they stopped in Madison, Wisconsin on tour to record with Butch Vig at a small studio called Smart, he started to record songs that would someday end up on the Nevermind album. As time went on, he used the tapes from the Smart sessions in Butch Vig and shopped them around.
But in the meantime, this doesn't put much money in their pockets. They continue to live in unheated dumps, subsisting on corn dogs and macaroni and cheese. Kurt gets evicted and spends some time living out of his car. Any money that does trickle in goes to his heroin fix. But Kurt's life is about to change in more ways than one when he meets his match, an edgy rocker named Courtney Love. Kurt Cobain, the Generation X icon who put grunge music on the mainstream map, is shopping his music around when he lands a new management firm, Gold Mountain Entertainment, that will secure his and his band's future.
Ultimately, once he signed with Gold Mountain, they got them the major label deal on David Geffen's DGC label.
DGC, or David Geffen Company, is having success with alternative rock, especially grunge. They offer Nirvana $287,000 to buy them out of their Sub Pop contract. In January of 1990, Kurt meets Courtney Love, frontwoman of the underground band Hole, at Portland, Oregon's infamous punk rock club, Satyricon. Kurt likes Courtney, but he's hesitant.
When Kurt first met Courtney backstage, he was immediately attracted to her. She was an authentic punk chick. She was a band leader of her own band, and he was attracted to that. The second time they met up, again, they were attracted to each other, but they realized they had things in common. They had sad family lives together, divorced families. They bonded over the fact that they both were carrying cough syrup, which they liked to guzzle backstage. And also, they were both band leaders, so they had this sort of friendly competition as well. But their emotional pain is where they found they had a real bond, and that was that they were both attracted to taking narcotics.
Kurt and Courtney carry on a whirlwind relationship as they tour with their respective bands. In April of 1991, Nirvana records material for a new album and opens for Sonic Youth on a 2-week European festival tour documented in the film 1991, The Year Punk Broke.
The Sonic Youth tour was really important to Nirvana. It exposed them to a big punk rock fan base across Europe, and they were going and playing at festivals of 70,000 people at a time. And at that time, they were playing songs from the forthcoming Nevermind album that the fans had never heard before, had never been on record, and they were immediately drawn to these songs.
A few months later, in September, more than 2 years after Nirvana's first album Bleach is released, the band launches Nevermind. Nothing will ever be the same.
Nevermind was the Sgt. Pepper of the 1990s. It struck a chord with the teens of that era that had felt a lot of angst. It was sort of the latchkey generation, and many of them could relate to a lot of the issues in Kurt's lyrics. The songs were very powerful, and the sound was explosive. It just flew into your face. It changed everything, changed the whole format of music. Radio stations changed, and grunge became a household word. And after that, everybody wanted to sound like Nirvana. Kurt's lyrics on Nevermind alluded to his pro-feminist views and his pro-homosexual views. And the irony was that the very people in high school that had tormented him and others, the bullies and the abusive people, ended up being the very people who misunderstood the lyrics and were in the front rows of his concerts chanting along.
The album's first single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, blows up.
Teen Spirit was a monster hit. It was on the radio, it was on TV. It became an MTV video that looked like a pep rally from high school hell. The guitar riff is now instantly recognizable as a classic.
At the end of the video, Kurt smashes a bass guitar bought from a pawn shop for this express purpose.
Who could have predicted that a smashed guitar from a pawn shop from a high school dropout who was living in his car would have brought in tens of thousands of dollars? But that's exactly what happened. One of Kurt Cobain's smashed guitars collected $100,000.
DGC had initially hoped to sell close to 50,000 copies of Nevermind.
Nevermind's sales completely exceeded all expectations by the Geffen label and by Nirvana. Nobody knew this album was going to blow up the way it did. By October of 1991, it had gone gold, and then a very interesting thing happened at Christmas time. Kids from all over the country exchanged their parents' Christmas gifts of CDs by other bands, and they ended up buying Nevermind. And it's the first time in history that a group had sold 400,000 copies on exchanges, and the album went #1 a week later as a result.
The band members become mainstream stars and millionaires practically overnight, a fact they find hard to handle.
As Kurt became more famous, he was very uncomfortable with the pressure of being in the public eye, and I wonder if that fueled his increasing heroin use.
In November 1991, the band starts a 6-week European tour as Nirvana mania sweeps the US.
That whole rebellious thing came through, and within 1 week, Nirvana's Nevermind album toppled Michael Jackson's Dangerous album Forever off the top of the charts. Nirvana took over, and a whole new type of music became a household word in America. At the time Nevermind was at the top of the charts, Kurt was having a hard time reconciling fame with how he felt about himself, his own self-worth. And as a result, he kept turning towards more heroin. His habit at this point had reached $100 a day. He was having trouble coping, and he was just checking out. At the same time, Kurt had decided on a new title for their next album. It was called I Hate Myself and I Want to Die. Seriously, he was in trouble.
That spring, Courtney and friends of Kurt's stage an intervention, pressuring Kurt to get clean.
Kurt's first rehab was at the Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and he was able to rest and get care. They were able to give him methadone to help him with the withdrawal symptoms of heroin. Unfortunately, he refused to do the 12-step treatment, so he never really could get at the root causes of his internal turmoil.
Rehab is rarely successful when the individual doesn't want to be rehabilitated. Bottom line, he didn't want to be there.
A tour of Australia and New Zealand in 1992 turns into a disaster after Kurt decides to quit heroin a few weeks before they leave. Without the drug, his stomach pain becomes twice as intense.
As a result, his behavior became erratic. It was difficult for him to stay focused and perform on the shows. His stomach pain got worse. He really didn't have a good experience, and either did the band on that tour.
Quitting heroin cold turkey, recipe for disaster. An Australian doctor prescribes methadone, but by the end of this tour, Kurt's back on his daily dose of opiates.
As the group's meteoric rise shows no sign of stopping, Kurt becomes disenchanted, worrying that fans are missing his anti-establishment, anti-misogynist message. I have a request for our fans. If any of you hate homosexuals, people of different color, or women, please do this one favor for us. Don't come to our shows and don't buy our records.
There must have been a part of Cobain that was so satisfied to have millions of people embrace his songs. And he had messages of feminism and anti-establishment. But then on the other hand, in these huge arenas, people are singing songs like Polly, an anti-rape song, like it's a sing-along. That may have been really disturbing to him.
But thankfully, an event in Kurt's personal life provides a happy distraction. Courtney Love is pregnant with his child. They marry in Hawaii at the end of the Pacific Nevermind tour.
During their wedding, she turns up in a lovely sort of satiny gown, and he turns up in green pajamas, which is obviously a bit weird. Why would you wear green pajamas? But I guess you're Kurt Cobain, so I guess it goes.
Because of their prior heroin use, they consult a specialist who assures them that the baby can be born healthy. Courtney immediately quits heroin and alcohol, but Kurt doesn't. Instead, he shoots up in the car so as not to tempt her.
Quitting cold turkey because you're pregnant, that's not a long-term solution. That's a short-term solution for your baby's health. But this couple needed really intense intervention for their substance abuse. Habitual drug users are usually really, really bad parents.
So by July, he's spending $400 a day on his habit, which is kind of modest by Hollywood standards, but it's enough to get him the nickname Kurt Cocaine to be revived behind his back.
In March of '92, Kurt makes an unexpected request of his bandmates. Kurt wants the royalties split to reflect the fact that he wrote most of the music and lyrics. Normally, they've been splitting the royalties evenly. Nirvana bandmates Grohl and Novoselic agree to the new split, but they bristle when Kurt asks for the agreement to be retroactive to the release of Nevermind.
Financial issues cause rifts in most bands. Usually the rift is, there's no money, we're all broke. In this case, there was a lot of money. It was, how are we going to divide this? And Kurt felt like, it's mostly mine, I should get the lion's share. In bands, there's an interesting dynamic. The support team is usually jealous of the frontman. So I'm not surprised that when Kurt asked for more money, more royalties, that was painful, that it may have injured their egos and their trust in him.
Krist and Dave felt betrayed because although they maybe hadn't written the lyrics, they had certainly helped to compose the songs. The only choice Krist and Dave had was either to go along with it and agree, or the band would break up. So reluctantly, they agreed.
Kurt receives a retroactive share of 75% of the royalties. He's about to become richer, more famous, and a father. Kurt Cobain, lead singer and songwriter of the '90s hit band Nirvana, has just married punk musician Courtney Love, who's pregnant with their child. But Kurt is still using heroin to control his stomach pain and is stoned much of the time. In April 1992, 2 months after marrying and after 2 critically acclaimed and commercially successful albums, Kurt and Courtney are living in a modest, sparsely furnished apartment in Los Angeles. That month, Nirvana is featured on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. A few months later, in August 1992, Kurt and Courtney's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, is born. But the baby is removed from her parents' custody when she is only 2 weeks old.
Rumors that Love was using heroin did trigger off an investigation by Child Protection Services, but she did say that she stopped because she did discover that she was pregnant. After a lengthy and costly battle, the investigation is dropped and Frances Bean is returned to her parents.
With the legal battle settled, Kurt can turn his attention back to touring. 1992 is a fantastic year for Nirvana's tours and record sales. It includes a memorable performance at UK's Reading Festival that thrills fans.
At the Reading Festival, there had been rumors going around that Kurt was too ill to play because of his heroin addiction, or that he even had died. There was a rumor that he had even died. So Kurt played up to these rumors, and he had someone wheel him onto stage in a wheelchair and a smock, and then he falls out of the chair just before he's about to perform, and Krist picks him up and says, "He'll be okay." And suddenly Kurt rips off the costume, and they tear into the song Breed, and it was an amazing electric performance, and it was just another triumph for Nirvana.
Also in 1992, Nirvana wins 2 music awards, Best New Artist and Best Alternative Video for Smells Like Teen Spirit. Despite the success of Nevermind, the band isn't happy with the album's overly polished sound. They want to record a new album, but they know they won't have a chance until the following year.
In 1992, the band was touring so much that they didn't have time to record a new album. So Geffen put out an album that Kurt worked on called Incesticide. And it was B-sides and outtakes from old songs they had in the can. And without any promotion whatsoever, the album went gold.
Kurt buys a large home in Seattle, his first concession to a middle-class lifestyle.
When they finally got some royalty money in, Kurt and Courtney went out and Kurt bought a big large screen TV and video games. And then he also bought lots of little plastic kitschy toys because he liked to do art projects, gluing different parts of dolls and things together. They also went out and Kurt bought guns and ammo, which Courtney absolutely did not want in the house. And finally, the two of them went out together and bought a big new Lexus. But as they were driving it around that first day, they realized, hey, we're gonna be viewed as big sellouts. We can't do this. And so they returned the Lexus within 24 hours.
By the end of 1992, Kurt claims he's made $1 million, but that after taxes, a house purchase, and doctor and lawyer's fees, he's left with only $80,000.
What he doesn't say is a lot of his income was injected into his arm. He was spending $500 a day on heroin.
In July 1993, Kurt suffers a heroin overdose. Instead of calling an ambulance, it's rumored that Love injects him with Narcan to bring him out of his unconscious state.
Courtney Love had a lot of experience saving Kurt Cobain from heroin overdoses. And now that they had a child, they didn't want child services coming in and taking their daughter away. So she saved him, didn't want him to go to the hospital where it would become big news, and she injected him with Narcan. A short while later, that same evening, Nirvana performed and Kurt was up there on stage. No one knew that he had had another very close near-death experience.
It's horrifying to me to see that the focus was about getting him on stage when he's obviously so distressed and ill and addicted. The priorities here are tragic to me.
Kurt had a different agenda for Nirvana's next album.
In Utero was produced in Minnesota by the band. They produced the album in only 12 days. It was down and dirty, raw and unpolished. They wanted to sort of distance themselves from the sound of the Nevermind album.
The record company worries that it's unreleasable.
The record label didn't think that the mixes were radio friendly. Ultimately, Geffen brought in another producer who remixed some of the songs so they would be more radio friendly.
Kurt proudly says the album represents the sound they'd always had in their head, but had been unable to replicate in the studio.
One of the tracks on the new album was called Rape Me, and Walmart refused to release the album because of the title of that song. As a result, they went to Kurt and said, can you change the words? Kurt knew that a lot of his friends used to buy records at Walmart and he wanted it out there, so he changed the title to Waif Me.
In September 1993, Nirvana releases In Utero. Even though Kurt thought it would alienate Nirvana's fans, it debuts at #1.
In Utero was a huge sales success. In America, it sold 5 million albums, and worldwide, 15 million copies.
The band begins a 3-month American tour for the album, but Kurt's continued drug use creates performance challenges. So midway through the tour, he goes cold turkey. Around this time, the band agrees to appear on an acoustic unplugged TV show.
When Nirvana agreed to do an unplugged show, Kurt wanted to do cover songs and deeper tracks, not a greatest hits show. As a sad foreshadow to Kurt's future, the stage looked almost like a funeral parlor, the way it was decorated with dark drapes and candelabras. It just had a very creepy look to it, and it was influenced by Kurt's choices for the set. And not only that, but 5 of the songs Kurt did mention death in the lyrics.
But the show almost doesn't happen.
The day before the show, Kurt was suffering from severe stomach pains and, again, heroin withdrawal. The symptoms were so bad that it nearly derailed the show because Kurt didn't look like he'd be able to make it. Fortunately, some medicine showed up and Kurt was able to go on with the show, and as a result, it was a great success.
The set ends with a performance of the traditional song Where Did You Sleep Last Night, arranged by blues musician Leadbelly. On December 16, 1993, Nirvana's Unplugged show airs to critical acclaim. The show will later be released as the Unplugged in New York album. On February 6, 1994, Nirvana embarks on a tour of Europe. After 16 shows, Kurt loses his voice halfway through a show in Munich. Doctors there diagnose bronchitis and severe laryngitis. Kurt then flies to Rome the next day so he can get medical treatment. The next morning, Courtney can't wake her husband. He's rushed to emergency in a coma and spends the next 5 days in the hospital.
So it turns out he overdosed on champagne and Rohypnol, a very powerful sedative known on the streets as roofies, which is interesting because he didn't even really drink. I wonder if this could have been a suicide attempt.
After a second tour, Kurt becomes a hermit, spending much of his time alone and high.
You know, certainly doing heroin or doing any series of drugs causes people to sometimes want to be alone and just do their drugs. But also the pressure of success could have been compounding to the point where he just needed to get away from all the demands, the interviews, the photo ops, etc.
A week later, Courtney cancels the UK tour for her upcoming CD release. It's time for both of them to get clean. With the help of bandmates and friends, she tries to get Kurt to join her in rehab. In the end, she flies to California alone and checks into a Beverly Hills hotel to do an outpatient detox program. A few days later, Kurt flies to Los Angeles and checks himself into a 20-bed rehab clinic. 2 days later, he tells staff he's stepping outside for a walk and disappears. He's reported missing. Courtney cancels his credit cards and hires a private investigator. 1 week later, on April 8, 1994, Kurt Cobain is found dead on his Seattle property by a visiting electrician. He's lying on his back in his greenhouse with a 20-gauge shotgun across his body and a gunshot wound to his head. The world is shocked. Kurt Cobain, considered the most important musical artist of the 90s, has died halfway through the decade, leaving behind his wife, Courtney Love, and his daughter, Frances Bean Cobain. The death is considered a suicide. For disenfranchised youth who idolize Kurt Cobain, the news of his death hits like a bomb. The media converge on his Seattle home, where Cobain's distraught fans are gathering and are looking for answers.
Tragically, Kurt Cobain joined the 27 Club when he died at that age. And that's a magical number, unfortunately, in rock and roll, where we've lost Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison of The Doors, Janis Joplin, and Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. It's unfortunate that he happened to die at that time, but it's part of rock and roll history.
I think it's possible that Kurt chose the timing, but I'm not convinced that it was a conscious choice. I think it may have been part of this expectation and this history of romanticized deaths of brilliant artists and musicians.
Nirvana's songs fill radio airwaves all afternoon, with DJs offering melancholy reflections. Some even play the phone message recording from the Seattle Medical Examiner's office that officially announced his death. Nirvana CDs fly off record store shelves.
Love handled the suicide of Cobain in a way that didn't glamorize it, and I think that really helped open up a dialogue about suicide among teens and took some of the glory out of it.
As the family holds a private memorial service, a public candlelit vigil at Seattle Center draws an estimated 7,000 attendees. The distraught crowd burns their flannel shirts and listens to a tape recording of Courtney Love reading Kurt's suicide note. Courtney later arrives with the note and distributes some of Kurt's clothing to fans. When Cobain's assets are tallied, many are surprised to discover that the unassuming grunge music rocker is rumored to be worth $100 million, and he has not left a will.
It's a big surprise that somebody with this much wealth wouldn't have even a simple will. Under intestate laws, this meant that half of his fortune would go to his wife, Courtney Love, and the other half would go on to his daughter, Frances. Because Frances was a minor, she was not allowed to have the money until she turned 18. Normally, this would be managed through a conservatorship process overseen by a court. Instead, the family agreed to set up a trust to manage the money outside of the court until Frances turned 18.
But a week later, a theory emerges that Kurt was murdered.
Cobain's attorney, Rosemary Carroll, has stated that she talked with Kurt Cobain about his will, and he was planning on separating from Courtney Love before he passed away.
Cobain's family had a history of mental illness, substance abuse, and suicide by gunshot. He had this predisposition to end his life and to struggle with the things that he struggled with. And it's so tragic that the course of his life couldn't be changed.
Kurt is cremated, and at a ceremony organized by his mother, his ashes are scattered into McLean Creek in Olympia, the city where he had found his true artistic muse. A trust is set up that will make Frances Bean Cobain owner of 37% of her father's estate on her 18th birthday, August 18, 2010.
Based on the trust arrangement the family had set up, Frances was said to be very wealthy when she turned 18. Would Kurt Cobain really have wanted his daughter to inherit so much money at such a young age? Well, unfortunately, there was nothing the family could do about it because once she turned 18, she was legally entitled to the money. That's one of the big dangers of not doing a will. You lose control.
Frances so far has fared very well given the fame of her parents and the fortune that she has. Most celebrity kids do not do so well. I mean, we see them all the time self-destructing in the media, going crazy with drugs, sex, you name it. She seems to actually have a really good head on her shoulders and has been very smart to stay out of the media eye.
There's a huge demand for more Nirvana albums. Unplugged in New York is released in 1994 and wins the Grammy Award for Best Alternative Music Performance. It debuts at #1 on the charts, and by 1997 is certified platinum 5 times over. That album and the 1996 release From the Muddy Banks of the Wishkah sell more than 5 million copies combined.
When Cobain passed away, Nirvana needed a legal entity to determine who was going to benefit from all the proceeds of merchandising, publishing rights, and everything else. So Love, Grohl, and Novoselic created a limited liability company called Nirvana LLC to oversee all of Nirvana's projects. In all, it took 3 years to hammer out the LLC between the three of them. Now, was this surprising? Maybe. I mean, that does seem like a long time to hammer out an LLC. But on the other hand, when you consider that Cobain committed suicide, the three of them were probably grieving and trying to tie up lots of other loose ends, on that hand, not so surprising.
In 1997, the Nirvana Limited Liability Company, or LLC, is formed, with Courtney Love owning 1/3. The record label DGC requires them to hand over a Nirvana box set for release in October 2001. But shortly before the release date, Courtney files a suit to dissolve the LLC and prevents the release of any new Nirvana material until the case is resolved.
Courtney Love claims that Kurt Cobain was the band and that Grohl and Novoselic were merely side acts. She says that she was railroaded into signing that LLC agreement and she really never intended to give up that much control. So she actually went to court to stop them from releasing a box set of Nirvana music. So of course Grohl and Novoselic countersued, claiming that she was mentally unfit, and they even demanded that she undergo a psychiatric evaluation.
Grohl and Novoselic reach a settlement with Courtney the day before the case is set to go to trial.
Now, while few details have been made public, we do know that Love came out publicly and said that this settlement involved lots and lots of money. And the lawyers also came out publicly and said that the settlement would significantly benefit Frances long term. Now, this settlement was made on the eve of trial, which in some ways is not surprising. Many deals are cut right before a trial because then the parties really have to think about if they want to roll the dice and go forward, and it might be an all or nothing if they move forward. So the settlement in this case made sense for all of the parties in order for them to do it.
Courtney receives a $4 million advance on the Nirvana Greatest Hits release in 2002 and a reported $3.3 million on the publication of Kurt Cobain's journals.
It's unclear if this $4 million was only Courtney Love's interest or if it was for the whole estate. Certainly Frances was entitled to her fair share of all the assets and royalties in Kurt Cobain's name.
Since his death, Kurt Cobain's estate has skyrocketed. Courtney Love controls the majority share, with daughter Frances Bean Cobain set to inherit 37% of the estate on her 18th birthday in August of 2010. In 2006, Kurt replaces Elvis Presley as the top-earning deceased celebrity after the sale of the Nirvana song catalog.
Many people have profited from the success of Kurt Cobain's musical genius. Of course, you've got his bandmates Grohl and Novoselic, who made many millions of dollars. The record labels and the producers who signed him also profited handsomely from Kurt Cobain's work. Even Nick Broomfield made $500,000 doing a movie about Kurt Cobain's life.
In 2006, Courtney Love announces that she has arranged to sell 25% of her stake in the Nirvana song catalog to Primary Wave Music Publishing for $19.5 million.
Courtney Love made a deal to sell her 98% of publishing rights to Primary Wave. This meant that Primary Wave was the one seeking to put Cobain's music into popular culture, movies, TV, you name it. The deal also included the complete rights to distribute Nirvana's music.
In 2010, Courtney Love signed off on the rights to control Kurt Cobain's likeness and image, all for a reported $2.75 million loan. She really was going through a bad stretch to give up that much control for such a little amount of money in the big scheme of things. Remember, she inherited half of his estate under the intestate laws, so she should have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Shortly before this, Frances Bean files a restraining order against her mother. They remain estranged for some time. In 2010, Frances Bean turns 18 and takes control of her trust fund. With her father's estate estimated at $450 million at that time, Frances's 37% is worth $179 million.
Frances, who attended art school, clearly has inherited her father's flair for creativity and the arts. She sings, she acts, and she's a visual artist.
Kurt Cobain's estate continues to earn millions of dollars per year, with no sign of stopping.
Cobain passed away in 1994, but that doesn't mean that he's not making money. In 2013, Nirvana would make $4.4 million in revenue. And that doesn't even include the 72 million online views for websites like YouTube, the 300,000 radio plays, and the merchandising, name, and likeness revenues.
The enduring popularity of Kurt's brand has often been a cause of infighting between its stakeholders.
Love didn't just fight over the money. She also claimed that certain decisions didn't do justice to his legacy. She threatened to sue Grohl and Novoselic, saying that they improperly allowed the Smells Like Teen Spirit song to be used in the 2011 Muppets movie. She also threatened to sue the video game company for allowing Kurt Cobain's image to be used in the Guitar Hero video game. However, the video game company said that she had signed off on the rights in writing, and of course she previously gave up her rights to the song, so Courtney Love didn't have a leg to stand on, and she never did go to court over these.
Kurt Cobain's name also lives on through a generous visual arts scholarship fund for Aberdeen, Washington high school students with artistic promise regardless of academic performance. In 2014, coinciding with the 20th anniversary of Kurt's suicide, Nirvana is inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, while his hometown of Aberdeen establishes Kurt Cobain Day on his birthday, February 20th. And a bench in the park next to his home is covered with graffiti and carved tributes. But Kurt's most important legacy is his music.
Everyone from Generation X has the Nevermind album in their collection. Kurt Cobain gave a voice to a generation of alienated teens, and his music resonated with them, and it's something that stays with them today as adults.